workers are on the move in South Dakota. South Dakota is one of the few states in which in the past 2 years, union density has increased every year in the past 2 years. It's gone up. That's the percentage of union density is the percentage of workers in a workforce that are covered by a union contract that has increased steadily every year for the past 2 years. Most states in the country, union density is either staying level or it's going down. But South Dakota, it's going up. Workers are not only getting together and organizing in their workplace, but they're reimagining how the state, how the city, and how the world could look with more leadership and more authority coming from working class people, coming from ordinary people, from refugees, from immigrants, from single mothers and things like that. How the world would look if it was built in their image, and that's important. And we encourage everyone to keep an eye on South Dakota. And when we reach out and say, hey, we need help, we need a little bit of solidarity. We expect you to be there for us the way we would be there for you. My mother is indigenous, she's Native American, Kiowa and Plains Apache, and my father is probably third generation of German immigrants, came here a little bit after World War II. So it's kind of a unique experience growing up in the South. We're a working class family, so we moved around, a whole lot, from different cities in Alabama, from small towns to big cities, and then to South Carolina for a while, and back to smaller towns in Alabama, and to Houston, Texas, and then I ended up graduating high school in a small town in East Texas called Mount Pleasant. Typical really working class family. I went to probably 4 different middle schools, 4 or 5 different high schools. Just go wherever the opportunity is, or wherever the jobs are at. You might not think of it as opportunity, but you go to where you can make some money. When I started organizing in high school, the first protest I went to was I was a sophomore in high school. Skipped school, drove to Gina, Louisiana. They had there was an issue around called the Gina 6. So there was had been some white kids, a small town Louisiana high school had hung nooses outside the high school, and it started kind of a fight there. And the white kids faced no real punishment, but the 6 of the black kids were facing serious charge. They were in jail, they're facing serious charges, attempted murder, and stuff like that. And it was kind of a big protest. And so I skipped school, drove to Gina, Louisiana, and protest there, and then came back to Mount Pleasant and started organizing. Kind of the first thing we did. I was a junior in high school, and the Bush administration was really ramping up their raids on meatpacking plants. ICE had been created, just recently. So what they like to do is kind of raid large employers. They came to our town. We had a large chicken processing plant in our town. So they came to our town and kind of set up this paramilitary camp, and were raiding people's homes. And I had friends who would go to school and then come home and their parents are gone, and there's no explanation of where they went, and all this stuff. It was really kind of barbaric acts. And so we organized a couple of actions. All the students wear red in solidarity on May Day, and then we had a march and kind of occupation of the downtown city square. This is a town that's like 12,000 people, so they typically don't have protests, but we had a march and protest, and we said we're going to continue until ICE leaves our town, and then they left shortly after, so we claimed victory. They might have been it might have been on schedule for them anyway, but we were emboldened by it, and whatnot. And then after I graduated high school, I actually ran for mayor of the town. I was to 19 or something, 18, 19. I ran for mayor of the town, kind of building off the momentum of the pro-immigrant organizing we were doing. But you know, I was 18, 19, didn't have a staff. I didn't really know what I was doing. Ended up losing pretty significantly um, because it turns out that my voter base couldn't legally vote for me. So that's usually not great. But it was I think a valuable experience at least. From there, went to Dallas, started organizing there. You know, got a union job. You know, did some organizing against police brutality, some environmental organizing, and then, you know, formally joined the labor movement, which was, you know, something I'd always wanted to do. You know, my grandfather was a steel worker, came from, you know, a typically pro-union family. You know, the labor movement was always, you know, the goal, you know, for me since I was, you know, a child. And so, you know, I got involved, you know, organizing teachers and you know, walk picket lines, and, you know, did, you know, put in my time, got arrested a lot, you know, and, you know, got the concussions you need to build up your resume, and then, and just, you know, did the best I could. And then there was a offer to come to South Dakota to organize with AFSCME, the public sector union, and you know, I jumped at the chance. You know, South Dakota, you know, this was shortly after Standing Rock. You know, there seemed to be a lot going on up here, and, you know, to kind of see if what could be done to kind of bridge the other issues going on in South Dakota with the labor movement was something I was excited about. So came up here, started organizing, then became a rep after that, and when I was 27, 2018, I ran for president of the Regional Labor Federation and won. And, you know, I'm in my second term now, halfway through my second term, and I'm also in the middle of running for president of the State Labor Federation. So that election is in August, and, you know, I'm 29, so I think I'll be by far the youngest state Fed president. After I got elected, you know, we made a real conscious effort to ally ourselves with the indigenous population, with the indigenous community. And, you know, it's something that hadn't been done really in the past. You know, I'm, you know, one of the first, you know, Native elected presidents. I'm one of the first, like, Native elected presidents in the labor movement in South Dakota ever. And the South Dakota Federation has been around for 100 years. And one second, give me a minute. But so we really wanted to kind of build those bridges, right? You know, seeing it, you know, it's heartbreaking seeing like images like Standing Rock, right? Where you have nurses and other, you know, union folks standing on one side, you know, protecting and defending the land along with indigenous communities. And then you have on the other side, you know, of the National Guard, you have on the other side other union members, you know, and they're fighting each other. And that's, you know, that's terrible. It's bad for our movement. It's bad for the environment. It's bad for the society as a whole. And so I really wanted to look in and see how we could bridge those gaps. So obviously the first thing we did is, you know, make the connection and say, you know, what can we do? How can we help? So a lot of folks don't know that South Dakota was the first place to abolish Columbus Day. South Dakota abolished Columbus Day statewide in 1990. You know, this is 30 years ago, right? The governor declared the year of 1990 to be the year of reconciliation. Not much came from it except for abolishing Columbus Day, but it's a win is a win. But since then, Sioux Falls, the largest city in South Dakota, hadn't really in any meaningful way recognized Native American Day, as well as called statewide Native American Day. On the other side of the state, Rapid City, which has a large Native population, they recognize Native American Day. The kids are out of school. They have a parade, things like that. Here in Sioux Falls, the kids have never been allowed out of school. They don't have any kind of events, things like that. It's like it doesn't happen. And so what we did is, you know, we helped form and organize a committee to put together a Native American Day parade for Sioux Falls. And so the labor movement, the unions, the Labor Federation, large funders, of the parade. I sat on the planning committee, and we had a really great turnout. March parade right through the downtown in the middle of the day, and so we just had our second annual Native American Day parade last year. And we're told now that this upcoming, if everything with the pandemic, is handled, this upcoming year, the Sioux Falls School District will be closed, and they will let their kids attend the parade. The plan was to just have a parade as if everything was closed, and make it easier for the city to shut things down than to try to go on with business as usual around an entire parade that's going through the relatively small downtown area. And that's been successful. We hope to build on that. One of my goals, if I'm victorious in this election for state fed president, is to work with the tribes in particularly the western part of South Dakota in Rapid City to build a worker center focused on indigenous workers. In Rapid City, there's not a lot of, Rapid City is about 25% native. It has the highest native percentage, native density of any non-reservation city in the country. And native workers too often kind of fill the spot of how immigrant workers are kind of treated in other large cities, right? Native workers are largely day laborers. They face wage theft. Native women who work in the hospitality industry are definitely at risk of going missing, being murdered. People kind of act with impunity, and there's just very little protection. Especially from labor law. South Dakota labor law is written on a Post-it note. There's very little protections. So I think that's kind of the natural spot where the labor movement and the movement for indigenous rights and for against missing and murdered indigenous women and things like that. There's a thousand places where the labor movement intersects with the indigenous community, and kind of putting our muscle and resources behind a worker center to help fight back against some of those daily occurrences of injustice is something I'm excited about building. Yes. With the Oglala Sioux and the Cheyenne River, they both were much more proactive than our state government when it came to addressing the pandemic. They immediately closed their borders around the reservation, which is absolutely their right. They immediately took strong action to protect the members of the Oglala Sioux Nation and the Cheyenne River Sioux Nation, and they've done an amazing job. The governor has done the opposite. The governor has refused to take any real decisive action other than closing the schools, but everything else, there was never a stay-at-home order. There was never a shelter-in-place order. There was never a moratorium on evictions or mortgage foreclosures. There was never a moratorium on utility shutoffs ordered by the state government. Anywhere that those existed, they were pushed for and created by the municipal governments, but there was no leadership coming from the state government. And anytime we pushed the state government to take any action like that, the governor would respond in these weird Ayn Randian kind of stream of consciousness, statements. You're saying, well, a man is free to shelter in place if they choose. They're also free to go to work and free to, lick the faces of everyone in a large crowd, or, it's just, everyone's already free to do what they want, right? But people are just asking for a little bit of relief. We're not asking to engage in a debate on the position of man within capitalism or anything like that. It's not what we want. We just want a little bit of relief. So in contrast, the tribes have really been able to handle it, proactively, and have shown great leadership. And so when the governor came out and said, the tribes need to lift their checkpoints, I and the labor movement immediately, came to the defense of the tribes. We said, wholeheartedly that we support the right of the Oglala Sioux tribe, of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, and then every indigenous community across the country to make decisions based on the best interests of the people on the reservation, that we would offer critical and material support to any indigenous community that is facing what is really a revamp of colonial repression and colonial aggression. The tribes, by setting up checkpoints in their own land, are not interfering with the actions of the state of South Dakota. They're not interfering with the governor's job or duties. They're in no way interfering or even inconveniencing what the governor seeks to do. So by kind of taking these positions that I'm the governor of South Dakota and I can tell the natives what to do, this is just, obviously clear-cut colonial attitudes, colonial oppression and repression, and it's something that the labor movement has in the past and should continue today to defend. The labor movement should be on the front lines fighting for the self-determination of oppressed groups, oppressed nations, and supporting when there's a call for national liberation. It is something that the labor movement needs to be on the front lines. Sioux Falls is home to Smithfield Foods, a meatpacking plant, large plant. There's about 3,500 workers, and it's a union plant. It's been a union plant since before Smithfield bought it. It's been a union plant since the early 1930s. There's been many strikes, some violent strikes, some facing National Guard, repression, and things like that. So it's a long labor history with that particular plant. Today, that plant is home to one of the most diverse workforces in the country. There's over 80 languages spoken within the plant, hundreds of different dialects. These are mostly folks, refugees mostly from the African continent, but there are also immigrants from Central America and South America. There are immigrants from Asia, Southeast Asia. There's immigrants from Nepal, Bangladesh, India, and there are also refugees, also from Eastern Europe, and immigrants, white and black immigrants from South Africa. So it's a very, very diverse group. The plant now, management has a hard time taking the needs of the workers seriously. Before as the pandemic kind of first started, the workers were in a unique position to identify the plant as being vulnerable to this disease because they're getting calls from their relatives and their friends from all over the world, letting them know how the virus is affecting their home countries, those communities, and whatnot. So basically saying, take this seriously. So the workers blew the whistle very quickly. They said, look, they told management, they said, the plant has a potential of being a hotspot. We need to institute some of these common sense things, social distancing, temperature checks, staggering schedules, things like that. Management did not take it seriously. They were taking their cue from the governor rather than from their workers. And within a few weeks, the plant became the #1 hotspot in the country. It ended up with over 1,000 of their workers testing positive, more than a third of their workers testing positive. And it absolutely is something that could have been prevented. If they would have given the opinion of their workers the same weight that they gave the government. But unfortunately they didn't. It's the most glaring kind of fact at the time was while the plant was the #1 hotspot in the country, it was the only place on the list. It was the only hotspot on the list that was a civilian workplace. Everything else on that list were prisons. They were prisons, they were county jails, and there was one aircraft carrier out in the middle of the water. I think the USS Thomas Jefferson, something like that. Theodore Roosevelt. But this is a workplace. It's not supposed to be the same as a prison. It's something you're there voluntarily, doing. But because they ignored the calls of their workers, then it became the #1 hotspot. So workers, fought and agitated, and we were able eventually to get the plant closed down for 2 weeks. The folks were given their full pay, their full benefits for those 2 weeks, so the CDC could come in. There's still been issues with the plant instituting some of the CDC recommendations. There were issues with the CDC report since plant management did not fully cooperate with the CDC while they were here. But so far things have been a bit better. They have instituted some of the reforms that the workers were pushing. The workers are represented by the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 304A, even though South Dakota is a right-to-work state, you choose whether you want to join the union, pay dues or not. The workforce is 85–90% union. Most everyone is in the union, and so the union was able to take the concerns of the workers and bring those directly to management very quickly. The union was able to track the spread of the virus in a much more efficient way than the state. Than the city was, because the union heard immediately when someone tested positive, they would alert the union. The workers themselves would alert the union, and so throughout the whole crisis, the union was getting calls from the mayor. The mayor was calling the union asking what the numbers are, because it would take 3 or 4 days before it would reach the mayor's desk, because it would go from the worker to the hospital, from the hospital to the State Department of Health. It would sit on the State Department of Health's desk for 2 days or so, and then it would come down to the municipality. And so by the time the local government was getting the numbers were a week out of date almost. So the mayor was calling the union almost daily, checking up on what the numbers were. And the whole time, as the local labor council president, I was negotiating with the city government, with the mayor, to pressure the employer to shut down, to pressure the CDC to come in, to pressure the governor to take decisive action, and things like that. Without organization, without a workers' organization, without a unified labor movement and labor council, it's likely that none of those things would have happened. It's likely that if they did happen, it would have taken longer, and more people would have gotten sick, or it's likely that more folks would have died than did. So it just speaks to the power of when workers come together, they can get things done that otherwise would not get done. Right after I got elected, we put together a committee called the International Solidarity Committee. So the International Solidarity Committee is made up entirely of immigrant and refugee worker leaders. And their goal, their objective is twofold. Number one, the International Solidarity Committee educates incoming refugees and immigrants, folks who are just moving into the community, and educates them on their rights as workers, helps them organize into unions, and things like that. And then number two, they also educate American workers, American-born workers, on labor struggles going on in their home countries and around the world, to tie that in, because it's important to get buy-in from the American workers for programs and committees and things like that support these refugee and immigrant communities. It's important for the American-born workers to get that buy-in. And when you can look and say, look, a struggle going on, between electrical workers fighting for a higher wage. There's workers in Eastern Europe that are going through the very exact same thing. There's workers in Africa that are going through the same thing. There's workers in Asia that are going through the same thing. The Electrical Workers Union is going through the same stuff all over the world. The same with the Meatpackers Union. They're going through the same stuff all over the world. And so if we can move the American-born workers kind of away from this weird Trumpian American exceptionalist mentality and move it into an internationalist mentality, identifying as workers, and that workers are struggling all over the world, and the bosses are doing pretty good all over the world. You know, if you're a boss, you're doing fine. And no matter what country you live in, if you're a worker, you're struggling. No matter what country you live in, then you know that really helps build that power, because it's really something to have a committee that is run and controlled and directed, you know, by immigrant and refugee worker leaders, and that committee having the full support of the American born workers. And it's I think that's definitely something that has to be supported, and that's a model that should be that should spring up everywhere. I've done a lot of work. You know, I've been working on the issue of policing and police brutality for a very long time, and you know, we've tried. I've been part of campaigns that call for civilian review boards. You know, I've been party to civil rights suit with the Department of Justice against the Dallas Police Department. Engaged in protests and direct actions. I've held way too many press conferences with way too many grieving mothers, and you know, I think, you know, at this point, I think it's clear, and I think it's becoming more and more clear to other people and even local leaders that what needs to happen is we just need to start over. You know, I think the policing model, the policing model across the country is antiquated. You know, it was developed. You know, the local police department, you know, idea was developed to catch slaves. You know, the typically law enforcement fell to the elected county sheriff, and the police department was used as slave catchers. And I think it's just kind of a relic, and that's why we're, you know, it's a relic, and we're seeing kind of the progress of our society flexing kind of against the boundaries of this relic of law enforcement. And I think it's time to disband, you know, defund, and then completely reimagine and rethink what the enforcement of laws kind of looks like, right? Because it's right now, not all laws are enforced by force, right? Today, you know, if I want to, you know, build a watchtower on the roof of my house and I don't get a building permit, I'm not going to get shot for it. Men with guns are not going to come, you know, confront me over me not getting a building permit. You know, the city planners, you know, I'm going to get a code violation, you know, from the city. And so it's right now, it's already picking and choosing which laws to use force to enforce, which communities to use force against, and things like that. So, you know, I think as a society, you know, we're kind of moving away from even the need of having the threat of violence, you know, around every corner, to do the right thing and to make sure you're not, you know, hacking your neighbor to death with an axe. You know, I don't think most people need that threat of violence to keep them from doing that. You know, I'm not doing it right now. I'm sitting right here with you. I'm not breaking a law. I'm not, you know, doing anything wrong. And it's not because there's policemen around the corner with guns. It's because I don't feel like doing anything. I don't feel like breaking the law right now. And like that's the whole thing. And I think kind of we're moving towards a direction where there's a more holistic, community-centered approach. So, you know, my position, there's been a lot of discussion around police unions and things like that. Who has the right to collective bargaining, or who belongs within the AFL-CIO, and things like that. There's a long discussion, and that's going to always continue. But I think, you know, outside of you know, the internal discussion of who belongs within the labor movement, and outside the discussion of who collective bargaining rights should extend to, I think that the immediate call right now is, you know, the police departments, there needs to be a national conversation, not just in Minneapolis, a national conversation. Police departments need to be defunded and reimagined with community members and workers and impacted communities sitting at the table and rebuilding a law enforcement or public safety apparatus that is rooted in the principles of justice and solidarity, that is not just out running, picking up more people to go work for free in prisons, to go work as slaves in private prisons or elsewhere. So I think you know, my position, the position I've made clear is, you know, the call is defund, disband the police, and let's work together to reimagine public safety apparatus that's based in the principles of justice and solidarity. Been involved in a lot of different, you know, fights and struggles, like on a community level, you know, against a lot of different issues and in favor of a lot of different issues. But to me, it seemed pretty clear, you know, by my analysis, that the labor movement is, you know, the only thing that is both, you know, accessible to regular working class people and also has the potential power, you know, to create that earth-shattering change that the world needs. You know, it has by far, of all the social movements that have ever existed, the labor movement, I think, has by far the most potential power, and it's very easily accessible for the most part. You know, if you don't have a union, you know, you know, union organizing is not necessarily a walk in the park, but there's a path, you know, for everyone, you know, to get there. And it's a clear path, and there's a tried and true path to get there. And you know, so to me, that's what was most important. You know, there's obviously a lot of injustices and a lot going on, especially when you live, you know, in a system that's built on exploitation and oppression, and its foundations are genocide and slavery, and you know, so a lot comes with that. And as far as I can tell, you know, the labor movement is the one that is best equipped to confront that system head on, and has the potential power to win that confrontation.